That's
Um,
right.
Hey, if we don't mind, if everyone's comfortable with it, go ahead and turn your cameras on. I do like seeing your faces. We've had a really fun community over these past 5, 6 months.
Yeah.
So Steve, as I was saying, we started looking at our first meeting back in January. We asked the question, what is poverty? We dove into that. We challenged different assumptions that we brought to the table with our own biases, with the ways that we were raised, the ways that our churches tried to go about doing poverty alleviation or ministry, or just the ways that we experience it personally. From there, we talked about how do we understand the context in which we work, in which we live, in which we play, understanding our neighbors. Are they experiencing, are they in relief, rehabilitation? Are they in development? Then we went from there. We were exploring asset-based community development, really diving into those principles, sharing just different stories. And we've heard from the Restoration House. So Carrie spoke,
Yeah. Great.
who's phenomenal. She can't be here tonight. I shared some stories from my school and the demographic that I'm working with, and the different challenges and the socioeconomic barriers and historical oppression that's played a part in their own journeys. And then last month we talked about how to actually create those triggers for change. And so we started diving into that topic. And then last
Hmm.
month we read chapters 8 and 10. So we're
Hmm.
kind of ending there. So not in my backyard, or yes, in your backyard. And then can you spare some change? And I actually had everyone read chapter 10 twice with a focus on really looking at the language of whose sort of responsibility is it when it comes to owning the process of change, right?
Right.
Working with those most willing and receptive to change. And so tonight is actually our last meeting as a group, and we're kind of getting into this conversation around creating personal action plans and kind of I will
Right.
statements around what does it look like now that we've kind of gone through this process of diving into this, starting our own journeys of poverty alleviation, and really engaging with our cities and engaging the work of coming alongside God to cultivate shalom. So that's where we're at, and we just wanted to have you on here, to learn if we can learn anything from you. I'm not sure if we will.
You never did in 4 years. So I
Never
don't see why
did,
we
never
get to
did.
now.
But
Unless you've
before we get
changed.
going, I like to kind of embarrass our guests that we have. So a story that I have of Steve when I was at Covenant. So Steve, he is not only just a great man when it comes to living out these principles, but he truly does embody it with how he lives his life, and with every single person that he interacts with, he sees the best in them, and he believes in their gifts and their skills and their talents. So when I first came to Covenant College, I was a freshman just starting, and Steve was my academic advisor. And I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know his story. I didn't know much about the community development program. And so Steve was like, "Hey, Kyle, it seems like you have pretty good transcripts. Why don't I put you in an upper level class?" I was a freshman. It was a poli sci class. Steve, I don't even know if you remember this.
I
Uh,
don't, but that's okay.
I know his name. Dr. Horn was the
Sure.
professor. It was a poli sci class. And as a freshman, I went in there. I was all bright eyed and starry. I was like, this is going to be amazing. I'm sitting in that class for 3 weeks. The teacher does a lesson on the Peloponnesian War. And then the next day, there's a one question essay exam that's like an entire paragraph that had nothing to do with the last 3 or 4 weeks of what we discussed in class. Everything else came from the readings from different seminars he made us watch. So I sat there in that class for about an hour and a half, just going, "Oh my gosh, Steve Corbett, what did you just get me into?" So at the end of that exam, I actually wrote on my paper on that test. I told the guy, I said, "I'm dropping your class." And I just turned in the paper. So then the next day I had to go and talk with Steve. And I was, really embarrassed. I was like, "I'm a freshman. I've been here for like a month and a half. I have to drop this class." And he goes, Steve was awesome. He's like, "Brother," he's like, "let me tell you the number of times that I dropped out of college."
Right.
But it was just such a reassuring way of saying, "Hey, we all make mistakes. It's okay. Let's find another course that you can get into." And just even in that, and the way that he handled that situation, to speak so highly of his character and the way that he nurtures and loves on people. So, Steve, just want to start with some basic questions before we get into
Sure.
some questions to the books. But tell us, a little bit about yourself, maybe a hobby that you have or a random talent that you have.
Oh my
What are
goodness.
your gifts? Let's start there.
So I've always been kind of into athletics quite a bit actually. I played college baseball actually at Covenant. I was a pitcher way back in the day. I have 7 children, so a lot of them like to play rec stuff. And I coached a lot of my kids. One year I was coaching 4 different teams with 4 different kids all at once playing baseball. That was wild. So a lot of time with that. And now that kids are out of the house, my youngest is now 25. Got grandchildren all around us, which is really fun, but got some more spare time. And I just retired in theory. And so open up. So my big question is how do I spend my time? So I've started last year coaching, and it was actually started by Major League Baseball about 5 or 6 years ago said, why isn't there baseball in the African American community like it used to be? So they've had a real push to do that. So locally, we have this thing called the Southside Development something organization, whatever, but it's to bring baseball back to the African American neighborhoods. And so we happen to be at one of the larger housing projects, and I'm coaching the 8 and 10-year-olds and just having a ball with it. I mean, the first year I did it, I'd say half the kids said never had played. Some of them didn't, which hand do I put the glove on, all that kind of stuff. So I'd say that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to. We start again next week. Is just taking all of the great experience that I have and trying to share that with others. I do ASL through our church. Our church is in conjunction with a local private school has started an academy for low-income kids, and that's about passion for both Mary and I. We homeschooled, so we spent a lot of money on our kids getting educated, and they went to Covenant, and all that kind of fun stuff, And so part of our desire, not only give our money for educational issues for those who don't have quality education always right at their feet, but be involved in that. So starting this fall, we're going to go and be volunteering in the school just to read books to the kids or just whatever the teachers need. So those are just passions of mine, is to be busy. I don't want to sit at home and just watch Netflix all day long. So anyhow, we'll see, but hopefully retirement for me is actually a chance to give more of myself into more different things than just my work at Covenant has been for the last 25 years.
Awesome.
Yeah. But I do have 7 grandchildren and 2 on the way. Just found out a few days ago another one's coming, and so that's really fun. And 5 of my 7 kids live within 15 minutes of our house. All of our grandchildren live within 15 minutes of our house. Matter of fact, they're all here right now. And so that I was raised in farm family in Vermont, where Grandma and Grandpa's farm was kind of the center. We all lived within 20 miles of each other, and so I was just all my cousins are like my brothers and sisters, and I was raised that really extended family idea, and I really love it. And I love it that it's kind of happening with my kids and my grandkids. So it's been really neat that them going off to college has not caused them to spread all over the world necessarily, which isn't a bad thing, but it's really nice. So anyhow, that's kind of where I'm at.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So just kind of curious, and I'm going to open this up in just a second for anyone to kind of ask questions, but getting into this, Steve. So this is, I don't know how old you are now. What are you in your 60s?
I was 68 yesterday.
Okay. Oh, happy birthday. All right. Awesome. 68. So, you do share a little bit about your story in here. But I mean, where did all of these principles and values come from? Because obviously mistakes made along the way and lessons that were learned. I mean, you didn't just sit down and write this one day. This came with life experience. So can you share kind of your story and your background of how you got involved in poverty alleviation and community development?
So when Mary and I were in college, she transferred into the college I was at. I was actually graduated from Covenant where I've been teaching. I was a senior. She transferred in and was just there for 1 year. But we had a class together called Christ and Culture, and read this book called Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, which had just come out in the late 70s, Ron Sider. And I was a brand new Christian. I became a Christian just before I went there, and that's another story in itself. And so I was like, oh, so God really cares about the poor. If I'm going to follow him, I have to care about the poor. That's just not an option. And so we both, she's from a totally different background. Dad's a pastor, Christian Reform. My wife is Dutch, all that. I mean, seeped in everything. But we both had that same reaction to it. And we got married a year after I graduated. So in 82, kind of looked at each other saying, well, what do we do? We had no money. I have a farm background. And she has a lot of horticultural background. She was actually a social worker major, but we ran into this thing called the Hunger Corps, with an organization called Food for the Hungry. It's kind of a Christian version of the Peace Corps, where you go and serve for 3 years, though, instead of just 1 year. So off we went to the Dominican Republic and then southern Mexico up in the mountains, and just kind of lived and worked with poor people for those years, and ended up coming back to that organization. Came back to the States for a few years, did some teaching and coaching and some other stuff, but then went back with them in the early 90s and spent the 10 years before I came to Covenant. I was the director of training, trying to work with all of our staff, answering the question, what is good development and what's unique about Christian development? Or is there anything unique about it? So a lot of learning, self-learning. And it was at a time when we first went on the field in 84, the idea of doing development was really new. Kind of Christians getting involved and stuff was a newer thing, but it was a lot of relief stuff, following after the hurricanes and whatever disasters happened, let's run there and help. And so it's kind of a new thing. To development was kind of a newer idea. So I was kind of came of age as we were experimenting, and they were starting to realize what that thing called development really is. A guy named Robert Chambers started writing a lot, um, whose reality counts, and farmers first, and all this thing about the poor need to be the center of their own change, and they know a lot already, because if they didn't, they'd be dead. So I spent 10 years working with staff all around the world in I was at Food Hungry, and the difference between that and a mission agency is all of our staff were paid. So they were national. So in Bolivia, we had 300 some odd staff, and I think we had 2 non-Bolivians on staff. So that's where I fell in love with the church worldwide. That's where I fell in love with culture and culture differences. I was traveling a lot, spent time in about 20 plus countries during those 10 years and working with staff. And that's where really we honed a lot of the ideas that ended up in the book. And you took the major. And so a lot of those ideas are stuff that I was working with Food Hungry folks back in the day. As I was working with people who had been like me, kind of coming of age when we're trying to think about what good development is. And yeah, so that's kind of, so when I came to Covenant, I came out of the practitioner world, not the academic world, which I have a real bent towards that being a good thing for students anyhow. So yeah, so when Helping Hurts to me is really, it's a reworking in many ways. Probably 75% of that book, I was working with staff in the 90s on that stuff. So it's not new. I think the only thing to read about what Helping Hurts, why it's been popular, is Brian and I picked an audience, kind of the guy sitting in the pew in church. That person knows God cares about the poor, and they should, but what do I do from there? And that was our audience. So the book is pretty simple. And Moody told us to tell lots of stories. They gave us a word limit per chapter, or that would have been a 400,000 page book, which was good. And so I think people have been able to grasp the ideas pretty easily. Now, implementation is a whole different world, right? But I'll say this last thing. And this is after you graduated, Kyle, that I started honing in more and more. What are we really doing? What's the essence? If I'm asked in an elevator and I've got 30 seconds to say, what's the work? It's really around helping people become more empowered. And I used to think that was a really PC word, and I've come to realize it's not. But empowerment is simply 3 things: people being able to analyze their lives well, make decisions to improve their lives, and then be able to act on those decisions. And our work is to help people grow in that. And likewise, we need to grow in that, because you and I, Kyle, are not finished products, right? We need to always be examining our lives, and that whole reflection circle, right? Remember, all that adult ed stuff is really important. So part of our role is just, how do you help people start thinking about their realities and reflecting on that? How you help them come to their own decisions that they've got to own them, but they've got to be realistic and they've got to actually be healthy, right? And then when they want to act on them, there's going to be barriers. So this young woman who's a single mom who wants to get a livable wage, and she doesn't now, she wants to, she's going to have to go back to school. Well, who's going to have her go back to school? Who's going to watch her kids? Who's going to, all the things that she's got, barriers that she's got, that's where we as outsiders come alongside that person to help them realize what they're, what they desire to get done. But that's the essence of the work. That's 90% of our work, is just that. And to me, it's pretty simple, but it's really powerful. It's also very hard. It's very complex because people change is hard, right? Yeah. You're married. I'm married. I've got 7 kids. Oh man, nothing turns out like you think, right? So anyhow, but that's I've really gotten it really simplified for all the stuff. I've got it right down to that. How am I help people thinking about their lives? How am I helping them come to decisions that will improve their lives? And then what do they need to help? If there's any, for whatever obstacles there are, how can I be part of that, or get others involved? And that's where you partner with others and all that stuff to help them, act out their decisions.
Yeah.
And then it just keeps going and going and going. It's just it never stops.
And that's what we talked about last month, which was just so great, is, in order to do this kind of work, you obviously have to be living life the way that you're earning the credibility of others so that you're able to speak into their life.
Yep.
So this is the last question that I'll ask, and then I'll open to the group. But for those that may be just kind of starting on their own personal journeys of, poverty alleviation or community development, or thinking about how does this interact, I know Lois works at a church and a few others are part of, larger churches here in Knoxville. But knowing, sometimes, Steve, when you first read through this book, you can kind of feel this weight.
Mm-hmm.
And this, like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do now? Like, I'm scared to do anything because I feel like I'm going to do everything wrong.
Right.
So what would your encouragement and advice be to someone who might be struggling with those thoughts as they now go out to cultivate shalom with God?
Well, I would say one thing. I know one of the big things we got when, the reactions we got when we first wrote the book was exactly that. Oh my goodness, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to accidentally, be due relief when that's not called for, and all that kind of stuff, right? Got a lot of that. And so I would say this: if you're working with somebody and you're in doubt, this whole idea of helping them and, maybe giving them some things or doing things for them. If you're in doubt, you're never going to go wrong helping somebody, right? If you're in doubt, I err on the side of being generous with your time and your resources. But the reality is, most of the money that Mary and I give is the stuff that we don't do ourselves, but we just know people around the world who do really good work, and we support them because we know they're doing the kind of work that needs to be done. And so so at one level, we need to be way more generous in this world, right? Mm-hmm. But what about your own backyard? That's where it might call upon you to personally get involved. And I would just go into it with incredibly a lot of humility, right? You're not going to be the savior. Mm-hmm. You don't really know it all. You're going to get burned. People aren't going to necessarily be happy with you. And that's okay. Just don't take things personally. Don't take other people's rejection or their failures to act on things that would be good for them. Just don't take it personally. One of our big things and our major, hopefully the takeaways you all got, Kyle, was it's all about being faithful, not being successful, because we can't control the success, but we can control being faithful. And you start small and you succeed. That's the other big thing. Just start in small little things. So I'm right now just doing this little thing with these guys in baseball. I have no idea where it's going to go. The guys are doing all Christians. We're hoping to get more involved with the parents and more involved in their lives, but we'll see how that unfolds, right?
Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, that's wise. I appreciate that, especially I told this group a while back that I have that quote in my office. It says, it's above my door. It says, start small, start soon, and succeed.
Yep, absolutely.
And underneath it just says, be faithful.
Yep. Yeah. Don't wait until try to find the perfect thing. Just get going, get your hands a little bit dirty, and see what happens.
Well, Steve, I've heard enough from you over the years. So I'm going to let these people, these good people ask you some questions. So guys, I'm going to open it up to you all. If you want to ask Steve, if it could be specific, if, you're struggling with this with your church or individually, I met this neighbor and I don't know what to do. Just feel free to ask a question or just reflect on maybe one of the principles or values from the book.
I'm just clicking through all the different people that are here. Um, this is definitely a female-oriented audience.
That's right.
There you
There
go.
were a few males. I don't,
Yeah, no problem.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm here. Whatever you want to ask, fire away.
I'll start along the same lines of the start small, succeed. I'm gonna mess up the quote, but start small, fail fast kind of. Um, how do you balance that with the not making assumptions and jumping in too quickly about certain situations that you see, but like gathering the facts essentially, but also starting quickly?
Yeah. So for the Start Small and Succeed actually comes from a book called, if you want to read a great book, by the way, it's called 2 Years of Corn. It was written it's the first book I ever read on development. It's still the best book I've ever read. The subtitle is People-Centered Agricultural Development. He's the one who first coined the term paternalism and what that is. And, really, the guy name is Roland Bunch, Bunch. I think the book is actually online now for free, but he's the one that said start small and succeed. I added the faster because a couple decades ago, I was talking to a guy, and I just forgot his name, but he was up in Michigan, and he was having in the Holland area, and he was just head of an organization that was just doing some phenomenal things. And he said, he was the one who kind of said, get going. Don't sit there forever trying to get it all perfect before you start anything. But you do have, Morgan, yeah, you got to balance that with not just being stupid, right? And not being ignorant about what's going on and not thinking you know the answers for people. So one good way to start fast is to do listening conversations and just hear what you hear. That whole thing about asset-based community development in the US, at least, I mean, the tool for that is this whole idea of learning or listening conversations. Sit down and ask them a series of questions and just ask lots of people in the neighborhood those questions and start hearing, what am I hearing? And who in that group have that leadership potential? They're about more than themselves. And then you gather them together and let them start talking together about what they'd like to see done and let them decide what that is. But the start fast is start doing those listeners, start getting out there, right? Yeah. So I think there's ways, and in the internationally, the tool to use really is this thing called PLA, Business for Learning and Action. Those tools, I mean, you can start using those. They're very much about people themselves coming up with analyzing their situations. You could start utilizing those tools of that in your work. I'm not sure what your nonprofit's all about and what you're doing, but if part of what you're about is being that agent of change at the community level, then you just need to make sure your staff are equipped with that and start using some of those packages of that stuff and let it see where it goes. And you can start that tomorrow. It's not hard. It's not hard stuff to begin to understand and use. So that's what I would say.
So I'm curious, in the context of a local church, if this is all making sense on a personal level, and maybe you're gathering a few friends together and reading a book or something, but how do you then take this? Because it seems to me to gather people together
Right.
in a church context, you kind of have to have a goal or a vision,
Right,
or
right. Yep,
where
yep.
are you going with it?
Yeah.
So maybe some experiences that you've had.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to think about that. So I come from a background where church structure is you got kind of the elders, the teaching and elders, and the ruling elders, and then you got the deacons who have that twofold responsibility of taking care of the church grounds and stuff, and then kind of the outreach, the benevolence, or the mercy, whatever term you want to use, helping people that are struggling. And so I would start by going to my deacons and starting or whoever in your church context is in charge of that kind of stuff, and start asking questions about how are they helping people. Are they happy with what's going on? We wrote a follow-up. We wrote 2 follow-up books to When Helping Hurts to answer the 2 of the biggest questions we got, and one of them was from people in their local churches that are in charge of helping people, and how do we go about that? So we wrote Helping Without Hurting in Church Benevolence. I would get that book. If I was in any church, I'd get that book. I'd start sharing it with people who are in charge of that. It's a workbook. It's not meant, it's very action oriented. One chapter is just 17 different questions. When you get done that, you basically got your policies of what you want to do. I mean, you can change them and refine them as you go, but you get going, right? And I would start with something like that. Who in your church is the center that has that responsibility? Now, you may be in a church that doesn't have that kind of responsibility. And so I know in some churches, they've started, some kind of committee. And I've heard the term mercy, mercy committees, from, oh my goodness, he just had a cancer, but what's the guy up in New York?
Tim Keller.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tim Keller. And he wrote, Ministry of Mercy to help people think about some things. And so that's where that term kind of came from in our context that Kyle and I come out of. But who are those people? And start learning together. Grab that book and start looking through it and saying, okay. And if you have to back up to, learn some of the principles of When Helping Hurts, the most underused thing I think Chalmers has ever created is called the small group When Helping Hurts, the small group experience. It's a set of videos of Brian and I and others, they're practitioners that are out there, that go through the lessons of the book. And then there's a little kind of study guide with key questions when you get done. So there are 45-minute segments. They're made to be like in a Sunday school or small group setting. I can't remember how many lessons there are right now. And you go through those and you kind of get on the same page, and then maybe you start asking, go to the next step with the benevolent stuff maybe. So that's what I would say, Sarah. And I think if you look at that, if you get that and start looking through it, I mean, I never have taken a book in my life and done what it said. Everybody takes it and picks out the things they want. And you will too, right? Oh, this makes more sense to us right now. So go ahead and just do that and see what happens. I've done a lot of consulting with churches and kind of the deacons in churches for exactly this reason. How do they get beyond just wrestling with, do they pay their rent bills or the utility bills? How do you get beyond that? And I can tell you this, though, Sarah, that in our church, in the churches I've consulted with, what they found is if they really want to help people, they're probably going to work with fewer people than come to them asking for help. And they're going to go a lot deeper with those people. They're going to walk with them over a number of years to get to the places where things are, they're in better shape, better places. So you got to think about, what do you do to the person who comes who doesn't really want to change? They just want you to help them pay their bills right now. You can't just say, get out of here. The church I was part of would give them a little $25 Walmart card saying, hey, you've taken the time to come here, and so we're at least going to give that to honor it. But in the workbook for deacons, the big part is an action plan. If you're not willing to sit down and fill out an action plan, then we're not the right people for you. So you've got to be willing to know what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to. And there was one church in Philadelphia that started making some changes, and they were helping over 200 people. They ended up helping 20, but in incredibly profound, life-changing ways that I think changed generations of families within those 20. But it was really hard. The pastor said it was really hard to start saying no to people that you'd said yes to for so long, and shut down a lot of those handout things that really weren't changing anything. And those are hard changes.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Sure. I make nothing off the books, so I recommend take a book. I think they're pretty inexpensive, but take a look at them. By the way, that thing I mentioned of the small group experience, the videos are all available free on the Chalmers website. So you could just use those videos and not buy the book. I would buy the book, however, but you could use that and buy one book and just kind of facilitate a group, have a Sunday school. So in your church, Sarah, start a Sunday school. or get a small group about, say, hey guys, we're going to look at this issue. Let's look at this as a small group. And now that small group may become, a center of a ministry, some ministry and some outreach.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
the official church itself always.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Sure.
And it looks like, Abby, did you send out all the links, or Morgan, somebody was?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, okay, great.
We can also link those in the follow-up email that I send out tomorrow. So.
Great. All right. Other questions?
So culturally, the average American gets uncomfortable when you get more than 3 seconds of silence. They get uncomfortable. If you're in China, it's about 3 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
You can be silent for 3 minutes and nobody's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I can sit here for a long time and just think and just relax. And
yeah, and they know me as well. They know that I like to make them uncomfortable. So I'll just do it.
Yeah. I actually have a question. You've kind of already touched base on this, but I'm curious how you would address this specific question. I know a lot of maybe more of the critiques of the book would come in when it's like, oh, but people swing the other way where it's like, oh, we're so scared to hurt.
Right. You don't do anything good.
That we don't want to do anything. And so we were actually talking with a family member the other day and talking about an organization in Uganda that we think is taking a more sustainable approach to missions. And this family member asked us, like, but is it really best to, like, is it better to not do anything? He's like, I think it feels like something is better than nothing. And he was trying to, like, get something out of us there. So I'm curious how you would respond.
Yeah, I actually don't believe that something is better than nothing,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes that something is bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? However, you don't have to wait till you get it all figured out. That's kind of what I said earlier to somebody. Morgan, I guess, just get it all figured out to get going, right? And like you said, that organization, you're not going to find the perfect organization, right? But they seem to be in the right pathway.
Mm-hmm.
Get involved, help them, and then see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And they may end up doing good stuff, and you may end up over time going, no, they're not the right thing, and that's okay. But just sitting back because you're afraid to make mistakes, that you just end up doing, it's all about self, because you're not doing anything with your time or your resources.
Right.
We keep, there's this thing you can get on, it's called the World Wealth Calculator. So I used to have this lecture in one class called Crazy Culture. I talked about consumerism. And so I'd always put in how much I made each year, how much our family income was. It put us in the top 97.7% of the world's wealthy. And I would say most people on this call right now are closer to that than not. And it's not, I don't make crazy money. I don't make bad money, but I don't make crazy money. But we are just so wealthy. We have so much. And even when yes, rent is here more expensive here than Mozambique, I get all that, but even when you start making some adjustments, God has given us wealth, not to help ourselves, but to be responsible with that for the sake of others. I in my different classes, I'm a male, I'm white, I'm over 6 feet tall. All of those have just inherent advantages in my life, and I tried screwing up as much as I did the drugs, I did all that stuff. I tried to screw up my life as much as I could, and I still ended up on top. And so, but God didn't give me all that for me. And so I tell people, don't feel guilty, right? I do a section on racism, and sometimes people get all the white guilt. And I said, no, it's not about being guilty. It's about feeling responsible and doing something with the power that we have. And I think sometimes we feel powerless, but we're not. And we just need to be, you can't outgive God. You just can't. And so I've come home from back when we were first married, said, oh, by the way, Mary, I just gave our car away because there's somebody at our church that needed more than that. Said, okay, well, we don't have a car now. Okay. And we have 2 little kids. So thanks, Steve. So, but God took care of that and provided for us. And mean, you can be irresponsible. I understand that, but that's definitely not a problem in the evangelical church in America, that we're over generous.
Thank you.
I don't know if that really, I got rambling there, and I'm sorry.
No, that's great. It's just, I mean, like, I have read this book many a times. This has been like what my life has kind of been built on for several years, and I still find myself sometimes struggling when I feel people challenging it, because I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess when you put it that way, it does sound like it's better to do something than nothing, but you're right. It's like having the wording to kind of explain that to people is important, for educating and bringing people along the journey.
And when it comes to like, it sounds like your family members in this organization had gone to, the action step was give to them. Well, just do it.
Yeah.
You know, that's very different than screwing up somebody you're face to face with in your own town.
True.
That's a different setting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and don't worry about, God will take care of how money gets used or not used and all that stuff. Just give it. Because yeah, otherwise we just end up incredibly selfish. Hi, Ashley. I've been waiting for you to ask me a question. Actually, where are you sitting anyhow?
This is just a backdrop.
It's a library, right?
Yes, it is a
That's why
library.
I said there's a lot of books back there, right?
Yeah, it's not my library. It's I don't feel like I have questions per se. I'm just in a place of gratefulness for the hard work of the book, and mostly comments, I suppose, but nothing of questions.
It's all right. It's all right. I just looking at you like, what is? I want to see clearer, just like to see figure out where you are.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I just didn't want to show my crusty couch. That's all.
Yeah, I finally found that blur thing.
Uh-huh.
What a blessing that blur thing is, because you don't want to see behind me right now.
That's awesome.
Rebecca or Lisa or Luis
Lois.
or Lois. I'm sorry, it's Lois, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it
Sorry
is.
about that.
No, you're fine. It's like I get that all the time. It's not a very common name.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious, kind of in that vein of like the doing something or doing nothing. Our church is kind of involved in serving, or well, is trying to get more involved in this one apartment complex where they do some like subsidized housing. So there's definitely some people there who don't have as good income as the other people who go to this local private school, but there's kind of an overlap between church members who are primarily white and wealthy, and then these other children who are in this apartment complex who don't have as high of an income and is primarily Black.
And they come to the church or no?
They don't come to the church. It's that their intersection is at this private school, this local
gotcha.
private
Okay.
school.
Sure.
The families at the apartment don't go to church, but they see these families from church at
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so one of the owners of the apartments, they go to church. And so through some connections, we did a couple of events last year during the summer. And they were just like fun events, like we would do like prizes and games and little things like that. And then, but we've kind of found that that's all we're doing there is that like once a month kind of we're doing that.
Right.
And we don't really have the manpower to do anything more than that at this point, where it's like doing something that would probably be more beneficial. And we don't even quite know what would be beneficial because we don't have like a point person exactly who has enough time to kind of be like, okay, what does this, community need, and organizing like the volunteers and stuff to do that. but it's kind of in a funny place where we're kind of just doing this like monthly thing.
Sure.
And it kind of feels like until we get like a staff member, because Sarah actually goes to the same church that I do, but it's a pretty big church, but we don't have a staff member to manage local missions and like kind of
Sure.
community outreach right now.
Right.
And so we're in this place where we're doing these like kind of big, expensive, kind of splashy kind of things,
Right.
but aren't developing like relationships.
Right.
I was wondering if there's like a gentle way to like off ramp from that,
Absolutely.
even until we like even before we get a new staff member who can kind of
Sure.
take this on like full time.
Don't wait till you get a staff member.
Yeah.
So you got a golden opportunity because you get that school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that my assumption is it's probably providing some decent education to some kids who wouldn't otherwise have it. I would lean into that. I would say, I would go to the principal of the school and see if we could talk to some of the teachers and to say, what could we do to help kids succeed in this school? And it might be some tutoring. It might be during the day, just going in like my wife and I are going to do and just help the teacher. One of my daughters and my son-in-law are in Memphis, and they teach first grade in a really poor neighborhood. And they've been doing that for about 10 years. And so whenever my wife goes out there, she usually goes for a week, and she just goes and she brings her puppets. And while my daughter has to do one-on-one over here, she's over here keeping the kids happy and excited and reading books to them and whatever. So my daughter Hattie and my son-in-law Matt can focus on what they need to focus on, because otherwise you just don't have the time. They don't have, they've only recently been able to get like a paid assistants in their classroom, but even that's not adequate. So that's just some volunteering. Yes, it's maybe, I mean, my wife and I are thinking about, once, maybe twice a week to start. So say, just go and say, would it help if we came, if you knew the teachers knew we were going to come once every 2 weeks for 2 hours in the morning, would that help? Ask them how you can help. Don't try to answer it yourself. They will have ideas. The church I'm at does a summer tour program called GLAD, which is basically an academic academy. Because one of the big problems with a lot of school systems, especially, is the amount of learning that's lost during the summer if they're not in homes where they're pushing their kids to, keep on keeping on, and that's hard. So there's a cultural stuff there. There's sometimes a single parent stuff going on. And so maybe instead of this big splashy thing, you say, hey, what if we offered a 1 week academy? It's more, some games and stuff, because kids need to have fun, but also some academic support. And what would that be? Maybe it's math, maybe it's reading. Well, one of my daughters is a reading specialist, and so she's really into how important that is. And so I would go to your school. I mean, it's right there. You already got some kids that you want to minister to in that, from the housing project that are already going to that school. And maybe out of that, you start realizing, hey, do they have the capacity to take more students? And if so, would scholarships help for those people who don't want to go, but will write a check in a second? And by the way, one of the biggest lies is that writing a check is a cop-out. That is the stupidest thought in the world. Because, man, if you can write a check to give a kid a scholarship, my goodness gracious, that's incredible. And so, anyhow, I get that a lot of my college over the last 20 years, oh no, it's a cop-out to write. We need to be relational. Well, then, get the kid in the school. Let him be relational with the teachers. Let him be relational with you guys. It's great if that happens, but come on now. Like I say, we give to organizations. We're never going to meet the people they're helping. We're not relational with them, but we know that the staff are. And so go, baby, go. So there's different touch points for people in your church, anywhere from just giving of funds to, so to maybe take that. Okay, so I'm not big on the one-off things like you guys are doing, but you probably would hurt some feelings if you just shut that all down. So you got to be careful about that.
But so it could be something more of like,
So
like instead of doing something that's like all fun games, being like, oh, maybe we're here for a little bit longer and we do some kind of tutoring thing, and then we like have something fun and stuff at the end. We have like treats and
I mean, I would go. I mean, your school is probably wrapping up right now, right? I would go to the principal real quick and I'd say, is there anything we could do during the summer that, we're not gonna do something for 12 weeks, but could we do a few things in the summer that would help these kids, and just hear and just listen and
Mhm.
hear what you hear and go from there. And some people in your church are going to resonate with that
Mhm.
because it's a mission. It's helping kids, especially kids that don't have access to good education, is an issue of justice. It's not an issue of being a nice person. It's an issue of injustices that are being done by our systems. So, and there's people that are going to rally around that. So I think you got a touch point right then. Just do that and see where it goes. There's a lot of interesting research that's been done about using the school as a center point for community development.
Mhm.
Because people are already there. You got teachers, you get people who care about those kids, the teachers and staff, and just working out of that. So even without any grand plans, I would just focus on the school and ask, how can we help some kids that wouldn't have these kind of experiences have a better experience, and maybe more of them. And who knows where it leads? Our school, just real quick, Paul, our school at our church just added on like 7 classrooms because it's gotten so big so fast. And that took a lot of money. But there was people, so kind of a little building campaign, but it was so cool because it was a church building campaign where the people in the church don't benefit. I love that. I love that, and we can do more of that. Sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
No. I'm sorry for interrupting. I was just going to say, you're speaking on schools and asking staff and listening. Obviously, I work at a middle school, and one of the things have been doing is just surveying them and asking our teachers, what is it that our kids need? Right. And I was reminded of chapter 8, which I know you all read, where, it talks about the Jobs for Life program. It says one of the most beneficial parts of actually their program is teaching these young adults these soft skills so that when they actually go into business, that they're compassionate, they're respectful, that they have a good attitude. So we've formed a relationship with a few of our church partners that are coming in and doing mentoring with our kids to prepare them for life with those soft skills. And so I was even just thinking of for your church, Lois, of like, I think what Steve is saying is like right on, of like, go and ask those teachers, or the principal, how do we support these kids and help them thrive, even outside of academics? Huge opportunities there for sure. So that's all I just want to say.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's like, definitely. It's like there's, a lot of schools kind of in the area that it's like we can.
It doesn't have to be just a one school. There might be another school. I mean, our church helps that school, but then there's a local public school that's definitely, it's 100% low income kids, and it tends to be a lot of African Americans and Guatemalans, and so, but we do things with the teachers. We help with supplies. We help with tutoring. And so we've got kind of 2 things going on at once. One's a deeper thing with the private school, but the other one's with the local public school. And that's a good thing. Ask some of your folks, find out about, so this is the athlete, this is the jock in me. Find out about what rec leagues those kids have access to and see if you can volunteer to be a coach. There's nothing better than a good coach who doesn't yell and put down the kids. And just get involved. With things that already are. We always like to dream up our own stuff rather than saying what's already a structure there and how can we help it to succeed better, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's a good perspective on supporting other things.
Yeah.
Well, I think the example Lois brought up resonates also with some of the other comments about making assumptions of what a community needs.
Right.
And then how do you change course when you realize your assumption maybe doesn't match what's in the best interest? And there's a little bit of saving face. You're like, oh dear, we've already said this. What do we do now? And how to then redirect after you've assessed the situation, maybe. I don't know, Lois, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm hearing that too is, at some point, like you said, we're not always going to get it right, but how do you change direction without feeling obligated to keep doing something?
Right. And so I wouldn't necessarily shut down those events because for some people it's really important to them, maybe not. Maybe they're doing it because the church just says this is the only option we have. but start providing an alternative and let that show for itself over time that maybe that's a better way to get involved. And maybe those other things will disappear over time and the resources that they are used will be rechanneled in other ways. Maybe not, I don't know. I would rather take, rather than having one big day of whatever, especially if you're spending a lot of money, and go buy some good equipment for the local park or so, or something that that's going to have some lasting effect in kids' lives versus a one-off, one-day thing. And removing ourselves from being the ones that get the experience and get the praise. We just need to remove ourselves from that a little bit more.
Steve, is there any type of, like, when you do consulting with churches and you're having them evaluate these projects or what they spend their money on, do you have any type of, like, not just like impact report or like metric that you use, but really getting them to think through what is the story that's being told because of this work, and like helping them to evaluate it in a gentle way so that they come to their own realization of like, oh yeah, this actually isn't doing anything.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. And so going all the way back to, I think maybe Morgan way back, maybe it was Abby, but I can't remember which of the two asked the question. I started talking about, yeah, I think it was Morgan, about the whole idea of starting to actively get out and find and getting to know people in the community and ask them questions about their lives. That whole learning, listening conversation, make it small and doable. So you're not asking people to give a lot. Don't make the questions really super uncomfortable. We did that in Knoxville. I mean, I consulted with a set of churches in Knoxville through the Compassion Coalition way back. Started in 2000, like between 2004 and 2007 or 8 or whatever. And the big part of that is go start lasting. And one of the questions we had on the survey was, and what do you think about your local churches? When you start asking people that question, you learn some really interesting things, and they learn some really cool things, like how some things were appreciated that they didn't realize that, and then some things weren't really appreciated they needed to hear. So anyhow, and it was out of that they created action plans of saying, okay, so this is what we're hearing, this is what seems to be important, and they work to create kind of that leadership group, and worked with them to say, what do you want to do, and how can we help you succeed in that? That was all it was, right? And go from there. You don't have to start some big campaign or some big, we're going to change this. Just get moving and help people in that community experience success that are important to them. I don't remember, Kyle, if you remember, for all the rest of you, there's this set of videos called ABC in Action. And one of them was in Asheville, North Carolina, in one of the communities, low-income communities. And what they ended up wanting, by listening to them and all, what they wanted was a bus stop, a covered bus stop. So they went through all this process and all that. And I'm sitting here going, you spent 2 years listening and interacting, and you ended up with a bus stop? What a waste. But for the community, that bus stop meant everything. I mean, look what we can do. We can solve our own problems with somebody walking with us. And that led to other stuff, right? And so you might hear some things, you go like, that's not the root issue. Well, that's not your call. Just not your call. And you have a right to say, nah, we're not going to get involved in that. And that might be okay in some situations to say that. I would be real cautious about doing that, but saying no, but.
Yeah. So like, in thinking about, okay, it's not your call, a lot of what we talked about in community development is like, we are not the hero. Our job is to be a catalyst of change, not necessarily the one who's responsible for change. At what point, like, let's say there is an idea and it's not something that's for life, and maybe you're like, oh, this maybe isn't good. When do you, like, at what point do you step in and like correct someone? Like that does come relationship and that credibility, but
sure. I worked with a lady who and I got to know her because her daughter, she was like 10 at the time, started going to our church and was just loved Jesus. But her mom, her goal, her golden calf or whatever, golden idol, was to get on disability. when she had no really reason to. And you know, I met with her and talked with her because I really cared about the daughter. And but she never really changed in that. And so, you know, we didn't help her with her rent. We didn't help her with other stuff. And because what she wanted, she was an able-bodied person. You know, I don't hear me saying going on disability is an automatic bad thing. So you just don't get involved. Internationally, there's a great story from, I think it's from World Vision, and I'm not sure where in East Africa they were working, but the local community realized the problem, you know, what they wanted to do. The reason that their crops are failing and their kids are sick is because their ancestor spirits were angry with them because animals were coming into the burial site. And so they wanted to build a fence to keep the animals out. So World Vision Head are like, oh boy, do we actually support false theology? Although maybe it's not as false as we Westerners think because we're so doggone secular. And so in that case, they actually ended up working with the community to help build that. And another committee they worked in, they wanted to build a mosque, and they said, no, we won't be part of that. So it's not always yes. And sometimes as Christians, our job is to speak into things and say, no, this is, like you said, this is for life and this isn't. And you can't back away from that, you know. Don't make participation of people and people's voices an idol in itself, because sometimes they're wrong. And that's part of our, you know, we're a prophet, priest, and king, and sometimes that prophetic voice. I think sometimes we're a little too quick to speak, but you don't want to fall on the other side either. So, yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else while we still got a few minutes left?
I am joining the game really late, so I wish I had known about it a while ago and have been able to enjoy the whole book club. Unfortunately, that was not the case, but
glad to have you.
Yeah.
Actually, go on the Chalmers website, and there's free videos that cover the whole book.
Yeah, I pulled it up already, so I will definitely take a look. But I did see, and I've read similar things. Definitely is a theme that I've been exploring for a little while. But the ministry that I'm involved in, we do a lot of really good work, and I think we do a good job in a lot of ways. The area that I'm less confident about, we do a lot of education, but short-term missions. When it comes to short-term missions, I'm very hesitant about. I try to do as much education as possible. We have some great resources that we share about how we can hurt people in those contexts.
Sure.
But do you have any recommendations for how to approach kind of that topic?
Absolutely. So the second I mentioned earlier, we had two big question marks. People asking lots of questions like, help us with this. So one was the church benevolence, the other one was short-term missions. Yeah. So we actually wrote a book called Helping Out Hurting in Short-Term Missions. So the book is for a person that wants to help change the perspectives in their church or their organization. But within that also, we also have free videos. I think there's 5 of them. And then little workbooks and suggested answers. So it's pretty easy to use as a facilitator. But the whole point is to rethink what this all is about, and say it's primarily about kind of learning and engaging. But the engagement is not primarily it's not doing things while you're on the trip per se. So we say, go to learn, and that means starting to learn before you go about what poverty is and what's good stuff. Make sure you're going with an organization, and this would be the responsibility of the leadership that actually is doing good work. And if they're doing really good work, they probably don't want anybody on the team to come and do anything. Sure. They want them to come watch. While you're there, encourage the workers that are there, because this is hard work, right? Encourage them, pray for them, get to know their names, get to know the names of their families, commit to praying for them long after you're home. Also, what a golden opportunity to find out how people from a different socioeconomic or cultural background understand who Jesus is. So find out how he works and who he is. because that'll broaden, when I went overseas, I thought I knew who Jesus was. And my 20 years, I found out, wow, I just knew him so little because I just knew him in such a narrow way. But the real work is when you come back, right? It's what you do after the fact. Are you going to be an advocate for that organization or that issue? Are you going to help rally other people? Are you going to start using your own resources, whatever? But it's all in that. I would get the book and take a look at that. It's laid out to try to help people with that, who want to bring some positive movement. By the way, there's an organization. Oh man, unfortunately they changed their name. I'll try to get it to Kyle, but they create something called SOE, Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Missions.
Okay.
I can't remember what their new name is. They're a good, or I've done consult. I mean, I've spoken at conferences for them and stuff. They are good folks. There is a whole group of people, Rebecca, to encourage you, that are saying how we've done short-term missions historically is problematic.
Sure.
Again, only speaking about short-term missions to areas of poverty, right? And so you're not alone. That's one thing you should be encouraged by. And Kyle, if you'll bug me, I will try to do some searching and figure out what their name is, and just you can connect with them and get on their mailing list or their email list and whatever.
Do you have any recommendations for, and this might have been part of the book, but do you have any recommendations for when harm has been done, what to do to go back if you need to repair a relationship, or if there's something
pretty hard to do?
Yeah.
Are you talking about short-term mission to another country?
The specific situation I'm thinking of, yes. It was, and I think anytime, like, you cover your bases as much as you can, but you can't always foresee what you may run into when you get there. So there were definitely some cultural things that we did not foresee. We had trained as best we could, those kind of things, but there were some discrepancies that, there was no real damage done, but there were definitely conversations that had to be had about how to repair that.
Yeah. So what I say, if you have an intentionality of continuing to work with that particular environment, you need to go back and say, we screwed up. And that may be you and a couple people going by yourselves and meeting with their leaders and just, taking the time and the expense to make that happen, to say, and sit down and say, we'd like to do it better. And would you help us understand that? One of the problems is you may be, where did you go, by the way? Just
that trip was to Romania.
Okay. So, that's not quite so bad, but we come from here's what I'm getting at. We come from what's called, considered a very low face, very direct communicating culture.
Sure.
Say what you mean what you say, and you're working often with indirect culture. So if you're like going to Latin America or Africa or Asia, and you don't ask the question, how do we do? Because they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear.
Sure.
Right. And then you come back thinking, see, that we got to start our own organization because we are the answer, obviously. Right. And so we come back with, it's because they're being culturally appropriate for themselves. It'd be wrong of them to cause you shame, because that brings shame on them. So it's going to take a long time to actually now Romania may be different enough. I don't know.
Sure.
I worked in Romania in Eastern Europe, so I don't know, but in a lot of environments, it's going to take a long time to actually hear how people really think and feel, because they're so conditioned to tell Americans, "Oh, you're just wonderful." Because you don't bite that hand, right? And so that you just got to understand that's part of the context you're working in.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. I don't know if it's a question really. It's an open floor. So I'm interested to hear more about your thoughts when we are trying to alleviate poverty, but that poverty is family members.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily have a question, but family would love to hear from you about maybe the differences, the nuances, just whatever soapbox you want to get on. I would love to hear it.
Oh, it's so hard, right? So, oh man. Oh, there's so many different ways. So I would say, like, for you guys like they're in faith and finance and stuff, like, for example, with our church, when people come for, asking for money, whatever, and we would offer like things like we did something different than faith finance, but like that, kind of financial counsel. We'd only do that if all the key decision makers from the family came together. Because the last thing that, still in America, the number one cause of divorce is financial difference of opinion around finances. So the last thing you want to do is to destroy families by getting the man all cranked up to do the Dave Ramsey stuff, and then the wife doesn't want to go. That's disaster, right? So you got to slow down on that type of thing. When it's your own, are you talking about your own family members? I'm not asking personally, but I'm just the idea of your own family members.
Yeah,
So,
direct family.
it's
in
hard.
my own
We had
life,
a guy in
and
our
I've got
church.
friends.
Yeah. So part of it is you don't want to be mean to your own family members, but you may need to start creating a different social network around you that replaces some of the things that you normally would get from your family. We had a guy in our church. We did kind of a jobs for life thing. And his family, he was working for the local sewer department, and his family, he wanted, but he said, he revealed he always wanted to be a teacher. He really wanted to go back to school to be a teacher. And they were like, they just destroyed him. Like, that's not what we do. That's not what our family does. We're laborers, and it was we tried so hard to give other voices around him to help him through that. And to be honest, in the end, we weren't successful. He couldn't break away from that. But then in other cases, we had another guy who did break away from it.
Just poof.
I wonder if his computer died.
It's just gone.
We'll give him a couple minutes. While we have a lull in the conversation, if we wait for him to come back on, I do have in the chat like a question that I want to pose to you, because kind of the whole point of this book, and I think this has been a theme throughout our conversations together, is that when we approach working with others, it's not just about seeking their transformation, but it's also about seeking ours as well. And that we should constantly be on a process of change or development. But I do just want to ask you all, as we've been going through this together and going on this journey, I think it was one of our first conversations, we talked about the word shalom, which means, a vision of wholeness, peace, justice, and right relationships. And obviously the book talks about the 4 foundational relationships: relationship with God, self, others, and the rest of creation. And not just physical creation, but the ways in which we are stewarding our gifts and our resources, our time and our energy. And then we've also had the opportunity to hear from different organizations, here in Knoxville: Seeds of Change. We heard Renaissance Creation, Restoration House. So my question, and this is kind of to hold us accountable, but it's asking the question: where is God inviting you to be a part of His work of shalom, a vision of wholeness, peace, justice, and right relationship with God, self, others, and creation? And how will you respond? This isn't a how might you or where are you thinking. I really want you to think about this question deeply. And you don't have to answer it right now I know we're being recorded, but sit down and take some time with this response. And if you feel brave enough, send it to Morgan in an email, because I think it would be cool to, either post it anonymously or even post it amongst our group who's been going through this together. Because I do really want to move from, like Steve is saying, sometimes we get so caught up in wanting to do the right thing that we don't actually make a decision to make a movement towards others. So this question is to keep you accountable to now moving towards action in your daily personal life. So that's the question I'm going to leave us with. And I'm going to send Steve a text right now to see if he's able to come back on. I have a feeling his computer died. But let me see. Hey, brother. Your computer. Or maybe that's his way of just getting off. Okay.
I just wanted to thank you and Morgan, Abby, Ashley for just even thinking of the idea and then going forward with it and getting us all together because I think it's just been really valuable. But it's also it's comfortable to sit here and talk with everybody, but yeah, then to do something with it really is the challenge. But thank you for the opportunity. So
Thank you, Sarah.
Of course.
And we're
Thank you.
hoping to do more things like this. We'll probably take a break for the summer, but we'll be back again in the fall. So you guys are all on our email list. So you'll get emails from us now, but we want to continue to be able to open up conversations like this and hear from leaders within this space because we will be the first to admit that we don't know anything, even though we try really hard to educate ourselves. So we hope to have other opportunities for everybody to engage, whether it's online or in person.
Yeah, and thank you guys for being a part of this. I mean, it wouldn't happen if no one had showed up to that first meeting. We would have been like, oh, okay, well, this is not happening. So we appreciate you guys just being open and vulnerable. And Rebecca, thank you for being on this call. I don't know if are you local to Knoxville? You're not. Okay. So I don't know if you missed this part, but we've been doing this book club locally in Knoxville for the past several months. But we've talked about, we wanted to do this last one virtual just because we wanted Steve to join and we wanted to open it up to more people. And like we said, it's not even required that people read the book. I mean, it does help to read the book, but we wanted to be able to welcome more people like you in. So thank you so much for being on here. And yeah, stay tuned. We are kind of thinking, like Morgan said, of doing a virtual book club in the fall, just because we know we have a lot of community outside of Knoxville as well. And so being able to open that up to more people will be really special.
Yeah.
And if you're ever in Knoxville, come visit. Let us know.
Rebecca, where are you from?
Close to Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Ooh.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. All right. So as we wrap up, is there any like gold nugget from the book or something that you're just like, all right, this is the one thing I'm taking with me before, we kind of sign off together. This is the one thing that I'm, committed to living out, or just something that was highly transformational for you. Anything that you just want to share out with the group?
I can start. I think my biggest thing, and I think about this almost daily because I'm in the nonprofit world. I'm a foster parent. I'm starting my own nonprofit. Like this is on my brain constantly is this idea that we are all poor in some way and that we are joining together to pursue, at least in the faith component, pursue God together. And that has just been, I wish someone had told me that 10 years ago when I became a social worker, or even before that, I became a social worker before that. Because it was always, to me, it was like, oh, I broke the cycle of trauma and poverty in my own life, and I'm going to help you do that, instead of recognizing that I'm still on that path of different ways of poverty. So that's really what is going with me as I move forward in life. Yeah, that's my big thing.
Thanks for sharing.
I would say, like Lisa, I am involved in nonprofit things all the time. It takes up a lot of my brain space, and I think you can get to a point where you hear it and it becomes very like commonplace. And this brought me back to when I was learning about this for the first time. This is one of the first books that I read and reminded me of just how hungry I was for this information and kind of reminding me that this is a lifelong like journey of learning. And there's, we read this book and we're like, okay, check, got it. But then these concepts are just something that we have to learn every day over and over. It's opposite of really how we enter into the world. We have to really think about like, okay, actually, no, what am I doing here? But I think just the concept of being like a lifelong learner of these concepts and the people around me constantly asking questions, like Steve was saying, of sometimes the first action is just listening, and that doesn't feel like an action sometimes. But that's really the first step in all of this. And we do that over and over every day, again and again, forever.
Yeah, in a similar vein, now that I've been through this probably my 10th or 11th time, it's um, just a reminder to never make assumptions about another person's story, because as human beings, we are so incredibly complex. The world in which we live in is so complex, and there's so many factors that lead to where a person is at in their own stage of change and development. So just like what you were saying, Morgan, just listening intently, but never making an assumption, because we're most likely wrong and we don't know the whole story. So I think that's what really stuck out to me this time through the book. So.
Now I'm always going to think in China, this wouldn't be awkward.
Sit it out. Yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
takeaway from
Yeah,
today.
3 minutes. That is I know we skipped that chapter. They have a whole thing on like intercultural competencies and understanding other cultures, which is a really fun read. So, all right. Anyone else? Last takers before we jump off?
Thanks for opening it up. Thank you.
Of course.
I do
Yeah, of
appreciate it.
course. Yeah.
Definitely we'll keep an eye out for future stuff.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much. This has been a ton of fun, and I hope to see you at Seed Coffee on a random chance encounter. So,
For sure. Thank you so much again, Kyle. We're so grateful for you and your
yeah, of course. Happy to do
facilitating,
it.
not
Yeah.
teaching, facilitating.
Facilitating. That's right.